Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, and we are back. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I think we both did, right?
Definitely. Like, Blizzard forced us all to have Thanksgiving, right? Not just Americans, but everyone else had a nice little break to enjoy this League of Explorers Wing 2 meta as
Hmm.
Blizzard just paused the release schedule by a week, which was really interesting. I thought that it was just it actually it completely surprised me when it was first announced, and then it actually happened. And as an American who actually celebrated Thanksgiving, as I was like having dinner with my family, I was like, this is really good. This would have been really bad if the actual wing was released today.
Yeah. Although, look, Blizzard is just throwing curveballs left and right, right? First, they just kind of push LOE on us, and it was like it's coming out Thursday, and I wouldn't be surprised, like, oh, it's not coming out on Thanksgiving, and then it just came out on Thanksgiving and blew everyone's minds. I'm looking forward to
Ruined
that now.
everyone's Thanksgiving as people just huddled on their smartphones instead of interacting with people.
Yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah.
something that people might be interested in, we actually met in person during Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, we did. We went to Olive Garden on Friday, like for brunch, which is the most Thanksgiving thing you can do because it has
Wait,
nothing
wait,
to do with
can you call it
Thanksgiving.
brunch at Olive Garden? That makes it sound fancier than it actually is. We
Oh,
went
is brunch
to
fancy? I just mean like I didn't have breakfast and it was
That's basically
lunchtime.
it. But yes, this fulfills ADWCTA and I's yearly quota of seeing each other in person once, and we look forward to it again next year. Mhm.
Awesome. But yeah, and as soon as I got back, Merps was having his extended Thanksgiving and his like long drive back to DC. But I got right back into a huge binge of playing Hearthstone Arena. I did like I think like
Mhm.
7 runs between Friday night and Saturday afternoon, and it was a lot of fun. And I played 3 warriors. So if you don't watch the stream, you probably don't know this, but I've been trying to queue up warrior since LOE first release, like since Wing 1, since Obsidian Destroyer. And it had been like 16, 17 like runs that I had done where warrior was not given to me as one of the 3 options. I don't think I've ever like tried to play a class so like with any kind of purpose like that I would remember if that's ever happened to me, and I don't know what the odds of that actually are, but it must be like staggeringly low. And then warrior finally appeared, and then it appeared frequently, and I kept picking it, and so I finally got a taste in the League of Explorers of just how good the warrior is with the fierce monkey, with the obsidian destroyer. And we had, I don't know, a above average deck, an average deck, and a below average deck, I think. And I got 12 wins, 9 wins, 9 wins.
Warriors
So,
back, best
Warriors
class
are
in the night.
back. Okay, it's just 3 runs. I'm not ready to pronounce the Warriors back yet, but I had so much fun playing the Warrior because it felt like an actual class in the arena. Like, I felt like I was playing the same game as everyone else, just like, using a class that was less loved and a little more difficult to play. I didn't feel like, I don't know, I was playing some totally different game where I'm like struggling to get like 7 wins because that's the cap on your typical warrior deck. So yeah, maybe warrior's still the worst class. The draft was still a little clunky. You still got to offer too many like subpar cards. Your hero power is still crap and all that, but it's a class now. Like you can make it work. I played a slightly slower warrior. I played a super aggro warrior. I played a tempo-ish mid-range warrior. It all kind of worked out, sort of, enough to get like 9 wins in a soft meta. So that's a lot better um, than where warrior had been before. Because I always play all classes evenly. So even in like the worst of TGT, it was just like I was still playing warrior, and it felt awful. It felt like you had no ability to do anything. You just had no control over any of the situations, which which is kind of the opposite of how warriors should feel, right? You have the weapon, you
Yeah.
have the double initiative always, you have the ability to like do stuff on the board, and you need to because you actually have nothing else besides that going for you. Like you have the flexibility of doing what you want to do with your limited resources, and then you're going to run out of resources, and you're probably going to run out of health, and you're going to run out of cards, and your board will die.
That's a good description. That's a very true and accurate portrayal. But yeah, I think it's fun, and we'll talk about this a little bit later of how just all the classes kind of mesh together. But that is it's very exciting, right?
Yeah, it's
And
good. And like, okay, so we said one of our predictions was that Priest was going to get worse because it got kind of like cards, and it was already like almost definitively the second worst class in the arena. But in the Priest runs that I've done in the last 2 weeks, it really hasn't gotten worse. It's gotten better, if anything. And I don't know why. I haven't been able to quite formulate like why the Priests that I was drafting were working out. There tended to be good decks that I had drafted, so that may be something to do with it. But it just seems like once you took away the TGT bonus of plus 25% offering rate to TGT cards, it really made the hero power less important. And that really brought, because one of the main TGT effects was that the classes with the most flexible, the best hero powers, all got a boost, and all the other classes kind of like got worse. And it was already like that, right? Because hero power is so important. And the gap just widened. Well, now the gap kind of closed a bit again. And I think it's really, like, you could really feel it, right? Like, we both had 12-win Shaman runs, which I hadn't had in a while.
yeah.
Priest has been doing good. Warrior's been doing good. My Hunter hasn't been doing that well, but what have you been playing?
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot of Warlock and Druid. I do agree, and I think the reason that our prediction about the priest hasn't come true yet is mostly just because of the bonus or a lack of a bonus. And then we're going to see another shift in the meta once all four wings come out, because then we're going to, or we should see, the 25% bonus applied to the LOE cards. And once that happens, who knows what's going to happen?
So, yeah, that's coming at the end of Wing 4. So right now, it's not like consistent. It's not like LOE cards now are being offered 25% more than other cards. It's just right now the LOE cards are just like normal cards. But once the fourth wing is released, they will all of a sudden get a bonus.
Yeah, I think that basically by us talking about all of these classes, I think it also just goes to show that once the bonus is gone, because the bonus accentuates this very small sample size of cards, and when you do that, what ends up happening is some classes will automatically go to the top. For example, when there was that bonus rate for Seal of Champions and Murloc Knight for Paladins, I mean, those are top two of the best cards in Arena, period. And they're in one class, and they get expanded offering rates. So you saw a lot of Paladins. And without it, we see some pretty good class diversity, right? Even what you were talking about priests, you were talking about, like shamans and rogues and basically all the classes. And I really like that. I think that's really healthy, and it's fun. When we had Ratsma on last time as well, and we were talking about, this is kind of what he wants, kind of consistent meta changes that kind of push someone to really adjust. And that might not be Blizzard's intention, but that really is what we're getting with taking away the 25% bonus for TGT and then re-implementing it later on.
Yeah. And I think Blizzard does intend for it. That's one of the reasons why Blizzard is releasing things in wings, right? Like, I don't mean that they're thinking about it necessarily from an arena perspective at the core, but that once they have this idea, that it just naturally extends to the arena, because that's what things do. Everything naturally extends to the arena in kind of an elegant fashion. And so I really like at the time when Blizzard pulled the 25% TGT bonus, I was like, whatever. But then you kind of see the effects. It's really blew the meta wide open. The TGT, so you keep all the benefits of TGT with the Inspire mechanic and the kind of infinite card advantage that it can generate to add a new dimension to the arena, which is still there, but you don't see it as often. But that's still okay. It's still existent, so you still have to account for that when you're playing. And you bring back the better class, frankly, the better class balance among all the 9 classes that existed before TGT. So, and part of this wonderful class balance thing, we were always so big on the rogue being the best in TGT by I think a decent margin compared to Paladin and Mage, and I don't know if that's true anymore. Just partly because rogue got great cards in TGT, and that's diluted a bit now that there's no There's no TGT bonus, but more than that, there's just less paladins, right? You
Yeah.
go to 10 wins, you're not guaranteed to see like, two more paladins before you get to 12 wins. We've had people reporting like, oh, half my matches are paladins, which is statistically not true. But still, paladins were definitely the lion's share of the classes that you saw after you got past like 4 or 5 wins. And that used to be the place of the mage. It kind of switched over to the paladin. Now mage is making a comeback. You kind of see an even number of mages and paladins when you get up to a high win rate. And well, mages, like rogues aren't that good against mages
Yeah.
because like mages have really easy ways of getting rid of your small stuff on the board, which is what rogues generally rely on a lot. And mages don't need to tempo out in the beginning, which rogue is really good at dealing with.
Yeah. And who knows? So we have this almost delicate ecosystem of classes and card offering rates. And right now, I do agree, we don't see Paladin that much, which makes rogues not as powerful because rogues counter Paladins very well, especially the hero power. And also, just a lot of the class cards are fantastic. Dark Iron Skulker, Fan of Knives. But we could see it swing back the other way as well. Once all the wings come out and once the offering rate goes up, we're going to see Keeper of Uldaman.
Oh my god, you're so on Keeper of Uldaman, aren't you?
I am. Look, I've been on the Keeper of Uldaman train since the very beginning. I have to say, that train is going pretty strong.
Okay, I mean, okay, I don't have a lot of experience with the card. I played 3 Paladin runs since LOE came out, and I've had Keeper of Uldaman offered only once, and I took it, and it did nothing. Partly because I never drew it, and when it was in my hand, I was like, like it's a good card, right? Because oftentimes you do want to hold it, but there's this tension, right, where you do want to hold it, but usually you can just play it out for 4 mana and then buff one of your like 2/1s into a 3/3, and you're getting a really good deal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it has that uniqueness where it helps you deal with something you can't deal with otherwise. So you kind of want to hold it, and I don't know if I'm playing it right, but I only got one shot at it. It just hasn't screwed me. Phrasing it the other way, right? We've all been doing pretty well in LOE. I think the stream average is like 8.8 wins per run, or just something ridiculous so far in LOE. So we've been at the top a lot, and we've seen a lot of paladins, we've seen a lot of mages, and I haven't been screwed by Keeper of Uldaman yet.
It is. So I have punished a lot of people with Keeper in my own runs. And I think it is a very strong card. But anyways, getting back to kind of the topic, it could very well change. Right now, we don't see as many Paladins as we're used to, which I think a lot of people are happy. But, it could once again be the Paladin show once Keeper gets increased offering rates. But we don't know, right? And once that happens,
so how do you use Keeper of Uldaman? I'm really curious. Like, teach our listeners how to be the expert that destroys your opponent with Keeper of Uldaman, because it's a very good card, right? Like, whether you think it's one of the top Paladin cards, or if you think it's just like kind of better than a Yeti, I think that part is not arguable. It's better than a Yeti, but there's a gap there. And if we all learn how to use it well, we may, do a lot better with our Paladin runs. And I know a lot of our audience plays a lot of Paladin because it's a very powerful class. So, and I'm curious also. I just haven't had a chance to play with it.
I think you hit on a key point with your statement of, I'm not sure if I'm using it the right way, because it's such a good card. And I think it can suffer from I'll call it the holy champion effect.
Yeah.
Where people are just like, oh man, I really want them to put down that capture Jormungar so I can Keeper that thing. Like, I don't know if I should use on turn 4 after I've mustered to get a 3/3 and push that tempo advantage, or if I should use it and use as kind of an outdoor peacekeeper, right? And I think it just depends on your hand. It depends on your situation. It requires a lot of turn planning. It requires also a lot of knowing what your win condition is. But I think that's so the versatility and the flexibility. Paladins have never had a card that is this versatile and this flexible. I don't think there are just many cards like it in the entire game, which has that flexibility, and it's so powerful because of that. But at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on you to make the right move. So it's very hard for me to sit here and say what exactly is the right move.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I was like, that's not very specific, but I understand.
yeah,
It's hard to get specific with this.
yeah.
But it is generally, so you think generally if you have a good play, like in my hypothetical, right? Like let's say I end up with a 2-1 because I made a good trade with my 2-3 minion a bit earlier, right? And it's turn 4, and I could drop a Yeti, right? Let's say it's an empty board. I'm just ahead, right? I could drop a Yeti on turn 4 with a 2-1, or I can drop a Keeper of Oldemon and turn the 2-1 into a 3-3.
Oh, I mean, I think 9 times out of 10, I would just drop the Yeti.
Okay, yeah, because that's what I would
Yeah.
do. And that's not
Yeah,
being too
yeah, yeah.
greedy with the Keeper of Oldemon keeping the value.
No, no, because all right, if you think about it, you're spending 4 mana and you're gaining 3 stats, right? Or basically you're getting
You're
3
gaining
stats on
one
the
more
one.
stat compared to the Yeti.
Right, right. Sorry, I mean you gain 3 stats on the 2-1,
Right.
but you're losing 2 stats on the body, so you're just
Yeah.
gaining +1 stat, which is not
Yeah.
worth it. Yeah,
Okay, so
that's
you
not
think
worth it.
Keeper of Oldemon gets more value than just one stat?
Yeah, so Keeper of Uldaman, it's a 3/4 for 4 mana. So Spider Tank is what you're aiming for, which is 3 mana. So you are basically giving
Yeah.
up 1 mana, which should be +1/+1, right?
So
You're getting,
basically, you don't want to use the Keeper of the Oldemon on your opponent's Yeti either.
if you
Because that's
have
basically
not,
gaining one stat above what a 4 mana card should get you, right?
once again, that
It's
situation is a little bit more situational. It depends on the rest of your hand, and if you can dominate their Yeti with something, that's
right, because
pretty
then you
good.
save your minion, which is worth
Yeah,
more. Okay.
right. So once in that situation, it depends. But if it's an empty board and you can either keeper to turn your 2-1 into a 3/3, or you Yeti, you definitely Yeti there.
Okay.
Well,
I just
I'm
wanted to
sure
put
I can,
something concrete out to our listeners, so it's not just it's a pro card. Use it good and you win. Use it bad and you no win.
this is the true card good bad or play good bad. Um, but yeah,
Okay.
I'm very
Okay.
like guys. If you've been listening since the beginning, you guys have known how much I like this card, and I think it's a very skillful card. It's a very flexible card. It's a card that you yeah, it definitely can separate the good players from the bad.
Yeah. Okay. So I think generally, like, if you want some kind of like rules of thumb for Keeper of Oldemon, you want to get more than one stat of value from Keeper of Oldemon, which means it originally is down 2 stat points. So to get a net of +1, you need to bring something down 3 stat points. And you want to beat that. So if you have a 2-1, using it is okay, but not the best move, and you would be okay playing just a normal card over blowing your Keeper of Oldemon on that move. On the other hand, if you are able to, let's say, lower your opponent's like Pit Lord, not Pit Lord, yeah, sure, Pit Lord, Pit Fighter, 5/6 into a 3/3, that's pretty good because you're getting 5 stats for 2 stats lost. That's a 3 stat gain. That's pretty worth it. Or even if your opponent has a Yeti, but let's say you have a 4/4, well, your 4/4 is going to go from being dominated to dominating your opponent's Yeti. So instead of your opponent ending up with a 4/1, you end up with a 4/1 if you Keeper of Oldemon your opponent's Yeti and then trade. So that swing is actually a 10-point swing, which is ridiculous. That's the kind of stuff you're aiming for with Keeper of Oldemon, and you just have to judge what kind of position your game is in to see if you can hold out for that type of value, or generally you're doing pretty well if you do it on a Pit Lord, and you want to avoid just looking at it as like, oh, this is Yeti, but with one more stat point, so I'm already getting some kind of value, because it's
So
worth more than that.
I have to call you out on this. First of all, you said Pit Lord again, but in the beginning when you said Pit Lord and you changed yourself into Pit Fighter, you know they have the same exact stats,
Yes, I know,
right?
I know. But Pit Fighter is more commonly seen. I was just trying to relate to people, man. Just trying to relate to the audience.
No, sorry. Okay.
Okay.
This is just kind of fact checking and just the stuff that we have to do to keep credibility around here.
So what am I running for president?
Uh,
Okay. So that's a huge aside on Keeper of Oldemon, but that's the card that's going to determine whether Paladin, does it. Like Merps was talking about, maybe Paladin makes a comeback to be the most popular class on the ladder, not the ladder, on the in the arena, and that really depends on Keeper of Oldemon once it gets a plus 25% boost. I don't think it's going to happen because one of the reasons why Paladin was so rampant on the ladder is because it was so easy to play, right?
Yep.
Keeper of Oldemon is not easy to play. It's quite difficult to play, actually. So Blizzard managed to give the Paladin another ridiculously overpowered card, but the effect is actually going to be limited in the arena just because of the difficulty level. And I think that's good, especially because the Paladin class was becoming a little too for lack of a better term, like noob friendly kind of
Yeah.
class. Um,
So
there's a difference between just powerful, right, like the mage, and being very noob friendly, like the Paladin was.
yeah. So let me ask you a question. What do you think after all this is said and done, after the 25% offering rate comes out, who do you think is going to be on top?
I can't predict the 25% offering rate. That is like I did not successfully predict the taking away the 25% offering rate and how that
Yeah.
affected the meta. And I don't know how adding 25% offering rate to a very small subset of cards. This is just like 45 cards, 50 cards. Um,
Something like
out of
that.
an even bigger pool now, right? Because the thing with TGT was that it was 120, 130 cards that it got added to a pool of like 600 or something, right? It was like a big percentage. Now you're adding 50 cards to a pool of like 700, or I don't know the actual number of cards in Hearthstone. But you get the idea, right? Like the impact is about like a third of what the TGT plus 25% impact is. So it's someone in Reddit did the math, and it was like you are guaranteed to be offered one of your common class cards like 70% in 70% of your drafts. That's not a lot. That means 30% of your drafts, you're not even going to see any of these TGT, any of these LOE class cards, which is the most common, thing that you could be offered. Much less the rare ones or the neutral cards or all that. So, and that's after the 25% bonus. So I don't know how much this 25% bonus will affect the meta. I know that the TGT one had a huge effect, and taking it away had a huge effect. This one, the actual impact is going to be like one third. So
Yeah.
it's just I don't think it's going to be a big effect. But don't take my word on that. I'm not. I'm still like I don't trust myself on this as much as I trust myself on predicting whether a card is good or not.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll see how it shakes out. This is the most fun thing. We can sit here and talk about what we think is going to happen. Personally, I think Mage
yeah.
has a good chance of being at the very top, but we never know. And this is why we play the game instead of just sit here and declare that, hey, Shaman's going to be at the top of the meta. No one play anymore.
I'm with you though. I think Mage is going to be at the top again. That
Yeah,
Ethereal Conjurer card is just
really good.
yeah,
Really good.
like it's good. It's easy to use. It has a little bit of skill involved in which card you pick and when you want to play it. Because sometimes you play it on an unfavorable board just because you're like looking for a spell, and that's the only way you'll get back in.
Yeah.
And sometimes you save it for later on because you're like trying to establish tempo or you have better things to do. And that 3 health is always really tricky to play. But it's just such a powerful card.
Yep.
Okay, so that was deep fried meta. I know we didn't say it was deep fried meta, but I hope you could tell that we were deep frying the meta.
Pretty good. I thought we fried that pretty well.
Okay, so now let's move on to what you guys are really listening to this for. It is our Wing 3 card preview. Once again, we do these previews on the Lightforge typically before we have the exact numbers that are going to go into our tier list. And the numbers will go into our tier list at ggoatgaming.com/tier list on like overnight Wednesday or like on night of Thursday. Just kind of like on the day of the release. And meanwhile, let's look at these cards and just kind of get some reactions and some discussions going.
Sure. All right. So, should I start it off?
Wow. Okay. Where do you want to start?
Huge Toad.
Aw, come on. You don't want to start with anything can happen or everything is awesome?
If you so desire, you can start off with that. I would love to hear your analysis of those cards.
Let's start with Huge Toad, but we're doing anything can happen next.
Okay. So Huge Toad, look at this ridiculous power creep. So the Bloodfin Raptor, our longtime friend and kind of pillar of the arena, as in kind of when you think of your 3/2 2-drop, you think of Bloodfin Raptor. And man, Raptor is getting shafted. This is just, it's better. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say it's strictly better, but Little Exorcist says no.
Whoa. How about Acolyte of Pain? Let's take a
Ooh,
card people actually play.
very true. Acolyte of Pain also says no, but it's look. Is it better than a Raptor? Yeah, it's better than a Raptor. Is it much better than a Raptor? No. The Flame
No.
Juggler is a premium too because you get to get initiative with it. With this one, you get no initiative. You always have the same problem that it can hit your opponent's face instead of hitting a minion, and the board state will change once it gets to their turn. So it's fine. You're rarely disappointed in one extra damage, but it's
No,
going to be
your
worse than
opponent can
Blitz.
screw you with it. It enrages your opponent's stuff. Acolyte of Pain. Like there's, I think people are going to be surprised at how often this card backfires on you.
Yeah.
It's in that positive. You'd rather have it than a Raptor, but I think the effect is like people are actually looking at it right now and saying Flame Juggler. Oh my god, look how good Flame Juggler is. No, this is like very slightly better than a Raptor. And we keep Raptor at a 52 on the tier list with like a Yeti benchmarked at a 68. So this is not climbing out of the 50s. I don't think. Flame Juggler is Flame Juggler a 68 or a 70? I think it's a 70 now.
It's quite good, and we've all
Yeah.
lost games because of Flame Juggler. It's just a very good card. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm reading the Twitch chat right now, and people are saying, yeah, I think it's almost as good as a Flame Juggler. We think there's a huge difference between the Death Rattle and the Battle Cry. And if you're thinking about what the difference between the Death Rattle and the Battle Cry is, it's really like what Merv said. I'm going to repeat it just because it can't be overstated, and that is just how much the initiative is worth. The
Yes.
huge toad doesn't die the turn you play it. It typically is going to die the next turn on your opponent's turn. So your opponent gets to determine what the board state is that this one random damage gets hit onto. And even if your opponent doesn't, just like leaves it alone, and you get to kill off the huge toad the next turn, well, now you're delaying the damage by one turn. Like think about overload. You delay the mana by one turn, and you can like overload so much more mana, and it's still worth it. It's the same thing with damage. You want your stuff out quicker. It impacts the board quicker.
Yep. All
Okay,
right.
so well now we got to deal with anything can happen.
All right. So go ahead.
You're never going to see this card in the arena, and we're not going to talk about it. And everything is awesome is the same thing. They're both really high mana costs. One is a paladin rare, and one is a shaman rare, and they both have to do with murlocs. And it's awful.
All right. Wait. All right. So I'm gonna throw this question at you. Between any fin can happen and every fin is awesome, which one is better?
Okay. Let's break it down. I was being a little facetious.
You were, and I have to keep you honest. This is Merps
God.
coming back to keep ADWCTA honest. All right.
Okay.
Let's go.
Anything can happen is 10 mana, paladin rare. It says summon 7 murlocs that died this game. 7 murlocs are not going to die this game. Most likely, even though you are a paladin and there is a murloc knight. What is much more likely going to happen is that you will summon 1 or 2 murlocs for 10 mana. I don't have to tell you that that is an insanely bad deal. So, awful card. Like, near unplayable. Maybe like similar to a 1 mana 1/1, maybe like a little better. Probably not. It really depends. Because okay, you could also not like play this card and then hero power at the same turn to like revive your Murloc Knight at hero power. You can't even do that because it's 10 mana. Like it's not good. On the other hand, every Fin is awesome is 7 mana, which means you can do other stuff on that turn. It costs 1 less for each Murloc you control, but you're not going to control any Murloc, so it's just going to cost 7 mana. But the effect is give your minions +2/+2. That effect is probably worth like 4 mana in and of itself if you benchmark that to like power of the wild, right? Like the secondary ability to power the wild.
Yep.
So you're only really overpaying by 3 mana. And it does allow you as the shaman, right? Because you have all these totems to get 2/4 totems, which are really, really good. Whereas the totems are normally pretty worthless. So you can even hero power before you play this to get an extra 2/4 totem. So in a shaman class, it's probably worth maybe 5 mana. So now you're only overpaying by 2 mana. Now it's never good when we say you're only overpaying by 2 mana, because you never want to be overpaying by any mana. But as the shaman that's trying to set up these like bloodlust boards, these boards that can get like, blood fire flame
Huh?
totems.
What? Flame
Fire
tongue?
totem? Flame tongue! You're trying to set up boards that can get good flame tongue totem values. Everything is awesome can be another solution. It's an inefficient solution, but the fact that it is a solution has value. Like, it won't be in the gutters when we rate it. It's going to be definitely significantly below average, but
So,
and worse than Bloodlust, but not unplayable.
all right, we've had the ADWCTA analysis. Now we have the MERPS analysis, in which pick anything can happen every opportunity you get, because that's how you're going to make this game fun and interesting, and that's how you're going to end up on Trollden. Boom.
That's how you're going to end up making your opponents quit the arena forever.
Yes. Also, make sure you draft a couple Murloc Knights, Hero Power. Actually, you know what? You might not even want a Hero Power. Just drop Murloc Knights and then hope for more Murloc Knights, and then just anything can happen, and all the Murloc Knights. Boom. That's how you win.
That you can't trigger on that turn, so your opponent can just remove your 3/4 Murlocs.
No, the opponent is gonna play a Spell Slinger into, and you're gonna get an Innervate, and then you can Hero Power.
Okay.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, I mean, that's just top level expert strategy.
This is what they're here for. I'm giving
right.
it to them.
Well, this being the Murloc wing, I think we could call it the Murloc wing because of the sheer number of Murlocs that are in this wing. Let's go to the next Murloc. It is another common neutral card. It is Murloc Tiny Fin. It's a 0 mana 1/1, and it is a Murloc. So it's basically a Wisp, but it's a Murloc.
It's much cuter. It's much cuter, and it's got tribal synergy. Although Hungry Crab. But this should be strictly better. And well, here's the thing: a lot of these new Murlocs, they weaken Murloc Knight, right? That's definitely a consideration. So
okay, so this is the first new Murloc that we've talked about.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about another new Murloc, but yes, this one is weakening Murloc Knight because you don't want a Murloc Tiny Fin coming out of a Murloc Knight.
Well, it's pretty cute. If you're winning, you might want the cute factor on your side, but typically you don't just want a 1/1 when you play a Murloc Knight. As for the card itself, not much to talk about here. Tough to get tribal synergies in the arena, and it basically is just Wisp 2.0 99% of the time.
Yup, not much to talk about. So the final Murloc is the Sir Finley Murgleton, which is a 1/3 1 mana cost legendary. I think, is this the first 1 mana cost legendary? I think it is.
Yes, I believe so. And
right.
I'm sorry, I just have to interject here. I was correct on the previous question of the GOAT. When it was asked, which card do you think has the best battle cry? And I said, Sir Finley Murgleton. And you guys can listen to the battle cry on YouTube right now. And it is an English Murloc. Okay. And he is ridiculously amazing. So once again, hashtag Team Merps.
Like he has a British accent. He has an English accent when he Murgles.
Yes.
As opposed to the generic Murgle that all the other Murlocs have.
He talks. He actually talks.
Wait, he says words?
I sent the link to you, dude. You listened to it, and then you admitted that I was right.
I remember that.
You're a
I guess I don't
terrible
remember
person.
him actually talking. Like, I have trouble understanding English people.
You do. You really do. Well, we got to work on this. Anyways, let's move on.
Okay.
So, are we talking about Sir Finley Murgleton?
So now guys, whenever someone with an English accent talks to me, like, all I hear is Murlocs. It just sounds the same as Murgling with an English accent to me. And that is... Okay, so let's talk about the Murgleton. Its battle cry says, discover a new basic hero power. Otherwise, it's a 1 mana 1/3. So first of all, 1 mana 1/3 is not all that bad anymore, now that people play 2/1s on a not infrequent basis.
Yeah.
It's not like... If you guys look at the tier list, you see, like, Void Walker, is ranked really freakishly high, right? It's like a 68 or a 66, which is something ridiculous for a 1 mana 1/3. But that's mostly because it's in a Warlock, so 1 mana cards aren't as bad because you can always get the card advantage later, and it taunts, which is really good because it saves you life, so you can tap later. So it actually gives you card advantage. In most classes, and this doesn't have taunt, so it's not that good. It's definitely below a 2/1 when it comes to how good the card is, but it's also like it's not worthless, right? It's not like a 1 mana 1/1 that we rank like, I don't know, 8 or whatever we give that card.
Yeah. So if you want to do a more kind of look at it class by class, the only class that it is actually very good, well, not very good, but it is actually good for is going to be Warrior, because we have your good classes that have, you know, really good hero powers that you almost never want to get rid of. For example, mages, you're never going to want to get rid of the ping, because the ping is so good for your class. Warrior, it's very rare that you're going to want your own hero power. But even if you look at the other kind of subpar classes like Shaman or Priest, they're going to want their hero power. Not necessarily because they're saying, oh, we have the best hero power in the game, but mostly just because it's impossible, almost impossible, to build a deck around this one card and saying like, oh, I'm just going to assume I'm going to get a new hero power. Because for those classes with Shamans, you're assuming that you're going to get totems. Part of your playstyle is going to revolve getting totems. With Priests, it's going to revolve around healing. And you can't base it on just this one card. If you never draw it and you're saying, oh, well, because I'm going to base my deck on this one card, I'm not going to focus on healing up big minions. I'm not going to focus on toteming and then getting flame tongue value. You can't really do that. So with Warrior, it's just kind of a net positive. For the other classes, it gets very murky. So is it going?
It gets murky.
Oh gosh. Okay. So is it?
So it's not a net positive. It's actually a net negative.
Yeah.
Like this battle cry hero power thing is like, you can make the argument for Hunter, I think, that it could be a net positive because you're picking. Yeah. Well, no, what you're doing is you're picking between 3 hero powers, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're going to get the option, almost certainly, to pick one of the ping hero powers. So you're not losing your reach. You're just having your reach. And in return, you get to affect the board, which I think is still very good for Hunter. Like, if you were a Hunter, let's say you drafted normally like a Hunter would, right? But then you switched over to the Mage hero power, or the Rogue hero power, or the Druid hero power even, or the Paladin hero power. Would you really mind? I'd be totally okay with that.
I think it depends on the type of deck that you have.
Just a normal Hunter deck.
Sure, but I typically don't draft normal Hunter decks. I draft very aggressive Hunter decks. So for my playstyle, I don't think it would work. But
okay, but I think if you generally just draft kind of, based on a value tempo kind of thing, you'll do fine with something like Hunter as well. Depending, right? If you have like a mid-range kind of Warlock, you may not even want your hero power. You may want a totally different hero power. Yeah, if you're a Priest, sure, some Priest cards revolve around healing, but if you don't have a lot of those, right, like you can just get a better hero power. Like Mage, Paladin, right? Those are always great hero powers.
Yes.
So I can see some uses for it, but it's just not, like, you can't look at it as a net positive. It's situationally positive depending on your deck, and you'll never draft the deck based on this card, even if this card was your first card that you drafted.
Yeah, like I said, it's basically only a net positive for a Warrior. Everyone else, you have to play towards the hero power that you already have. With Warrior, you're never playing towards the hero power. I can't say never, because weapons, but I think a lot of times you would prefer just another hero power as the Warrior.
Oh yeah, especially if it's a ping, right? Warrior with a ping, definitely. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's OP. Because the Warrior's main problem is that you can only deal damage in one way through weapons. You can never deal 2 types of damage from your hand.
Yes.
And this solves it. Okay. Gorilla Bot A3. is the next card we're talking about. It is another common neutral card. So in Wing 2, they basically released a crap ton of class cards. Wing 3, you get to see a lot of neutral cards. So that means it's going to affect pretty much every class. But it's only going to affect it very slightly. Because, yes, they are common neutral cards, but the card pool is diluted so much now. You're really not going to see that many huge toads. You're not going to see that many Murloc Tiny Fins. And you're not going to see that many Gorilla Bot A3s. Which is a good thing, because the Gorilla Bot A3 kind of sucks. It's a 4-mana card. It is a 3/4 mech. So there's a mech.
Yes.
And it has a battle cry. Like, you think 4-mana 3/4. What do you usually get with that? Oh, Murloc Knight. You get your Keeper of Oldamon. You get your Void Callers. What amazing ability does this card have? Battle cry. If you control another mech, so if you have another mech on the board, like Tinkertown Technician style, discover a mech.
Yeah. Not that great.
So the discover mechanic being you get to, they give you 3 mechs from your class that you can pick from, and you pick it.
Yep. So I think a very good comparison would be something like Tomb Spider. Similar card that comes in the same expansion. So both cost 4 mana. This Gorilla Bot has 1 more HP, right? It has 1 more HP, and instead of a beast, you discover a mech. Now, the good thing about mechs is that mechs have synergy with other mechs. They have good synergy, within the tribe itself. Unless you're a druid or a hunter, you're not going to get neutral beast synergy. However, you basically need another mech. With the Tomb Spider, it's just anti-tempo, but you grab another card. You get a free card. With this, you need another mech out there. And, we're not getting flooded with mechs in this expansion.
So mechs are getting diluted down more.
Yes. So, you can go Gorilla Bot into Gorilla Bot, or, something like that. But it's anti-tempo. You have to hit a necessary condition. And even within that, mechs, it's not as if there's such strong synergy within mechs. It's not like Murlocs, right? Murlocs have probably the strongest synergy amongst themselves, period. Mechs have some pretty good synergies, but it's not earth-shattering. So Gorilla Bot, unfortunately, is just not going to be a great card. It's you can pick it, and it's going to be better than quite a few cards. And
it's not going to be a great card. It's not going to be a good card. It's not going to be an average card. It's not even going to be a bad card. It's going to be a pretty awful card.
I don't know. We'll see about that. And this is something that ADWCTA and I will talk about when we prep the tier list. But
think about Tinkertown. How often does it hit? This one costs 1 more mana.
Yeah, I know.
And when you play it, it's guaranteed anti-tempo. Instead of Tinkertown, when you play it, it's actually like +1 tempo in addition to the spare part you get.
Yep. I think Tinkertown is a fair kind of, it's a fair assessment, really.
Yeah.
But
just flat out worse. Okay. Now, and also because Tinkertown's at the 3 spot, 3 spot is generally a little iffy, whereas the 4 slot is just full of decent sized cards.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's Huge Toad, Gorilla Bot, A3, and Tiny Fin, Murloc Tiny Fin. Those are your 3 new common cards that are coming with this wing. As you hear, we're not terribly excited about them. Not even the Huge Toad, right? Which I think a lot of people are overly excited about compared to what it'll actually do. But it's just... good cards are not coming from what we have gone over so far. So let's see if we can change that. Let's see if we could change that with the last neutral card that is being released with this wing. It is the Naga Sea Witch. It is a epic, so you're not really going to see it. But what if you do see it? Do you want to pick it? It's a 5 mana 5/5 with the ability that says your cards, that means all of your cards, cost 5 mana.
Oh boy. So ADWCTA and I talked about this card a little bit before. So when we were on the phone discussing it, at first I thought it was your minions cost 5. And I was like, oh yeah, this card is, it's pretty decent. And then I learned it's your cards cost 5, and oh boy, it gets a little bit rough from there. So my initial analysis is just if this card were to see, kind of extended play, it's definitely more of a constructed card than an arena card. Like I can see some decks, even though cheesy decks that could revolve around this mechanic. Um,
Astral Communion.
I don't know. Who knows? Like, we are not the constructed players to consult with this thing. I don't think it's the worst card in the world. 5 mana for 5/5. That's a pretty good body. The problem is if it doesn't get killed next turn, you basically need something Boulder Fist Ogre or above for you to play to make it worth it. Otherwise, you're just if you're playing a Shredder, then you're not, because it's turn 6 and it becomes awkward. So you're going to hang 1 mana, and you can't fill up that 1 mana with anything because all of your cards cost 5. So you're going to need to kind of curve into a Boulder Fist Ogre, or let's just say Force Tank Max, right? That's a really good situation. But you need that card in your hand, and if you don't have it, the downside is pretty bad. I don't think it's the worst card, but the fact that it's all of your cards cost 5, it's not even like Ventrico, where if you have a lot of spells in your hand, you can really sort of cheat in a way by getting out of Ventrico. It's overstated, and then you can cheat by just playing removal spells or just spells period on your next turn.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with this compared to the Ventrico is that you get no benefit. Like, this makes Ventrico look so good. Because for Ventrico, you get, like, additional stats. With this, you have actually one less stat to what 5 mana should get you.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you still have 5 health, so it's still really freaking hard for you to kill off on your next turn. And it'll probably take you 2 turns to kill it, so you have to make this ability work for you. Where this ability shines more is if you have a lot of big cards and you play it on turn 10 or turn 9. Like, you drop it on the board on turn 9, or you just play it flat out on turn 10 and you play a Force Tank Max with it on that turn, and then the next turn you have 2 more big cards to play with it. Then it works really well. But otherwise, it creates such awful situations, right? Where now let's be fair. By turn 5 or by whenever you play the Naga Sea Witch, you're probably going to have a card. You're probably going to have a card in your hand that is really big because you would not have been playing that card earlier. Yeah. So it's a pretty high likelihood that if you have a kind of a normal mid-range deck, and especially if you have a heavier deck, that you will get that card to play. But just because you have that card to play doesn't mean that you will get value out of it. Because, like, think about, let's say you don't get to play the Naga Sea Witch until turn 7. You play a 2-drop, you play a Naga Sea Witch. Next turn is turn 8. Well, you have 3 mana that you're definitely going to hang, even if you are getting out your Force Tank Max. So you haven't actually gained anything on your Force Tank Max.
Right.
And in another situation where even if you get this out on turn 5, you're going to play your Force Tank Max on turn 6, you're going to save that 2 mana, you're locked into your Force Tank Max now. You have no flexibility on your next move. Like, if your next move really should be like Frostbolt and then play another card because you really need to Frostbolt that thing, or like Frostbolt Hero Power, play another card, right? You really can't. I mean, you can, but you'll really anti-tempo yourself. Now, it is worth to note that it's your cards cost 5 mana, so you do get to use an additional hero power in the cases where you're playing, you have 8 mana, you spend 5 mana on the card, and then you do your hero power. But it's the same thing, right? You're still locked into that play.
Yeah, and this is another one of those cards where, so opponents can try to make it awkward for you, right? And I think a good comparison is Ventrico, but with this card, you're even more predictable because anything you play is 5 mana. They can't anticipate kind of like cheap spells coming out of you as well. So, one way for you to effectively use Naga Sea Witch is like, let's say you play it on turn 7, you're going into turn 8, and then suddenly, you have a way to kill off Naga Sea Witch. So you play your North Sea Kraken first for 5 mana, and then you kill off the Naga Sea Witch, and then you still have 3 mana to do stuff with. That's great. That's a great tempo swing. You get out Kraken, and you're able to tempo out 3 mana, but that's best case scenario. And on the flip side, they could just make sure that, they make the board as awkward as possible. You can't really kill off your Naga Sea Witch. and then you can just put out one minion. And a lot of the times, that's exactly what you want to do when you're on the other side of Naga Sea Witch. For
Yep.
you to spread out and for them to drop just one big guy or to just use it like one card, right?
You make yourself very predictable.
Yes, and predictability oftentimes means death in the arena when you're that predictable. Now, we're trashing this card a lot. I don't think it's the worst card ever. You're going to get some good uses out of it, but
It's below average. Like, you look at a 5-mana 5/5 body, we have Tiger Rate is super high. We have, like, what is it, the mech Clockwork Knight.
Yes,
we have that rated very high, even though its ability you rarely get to use. But this is not the same. This has a significant negative ability.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to the class cards. We get a few fun class cards this time around, and by a few fun class cards, I mean like 4. After the any fin can happen and every fin is awesome stuff.
Okay. All right. So what are we talking about?
Well, let's start with the most fun one. No, you know what? No, let's not start with let's save Dart Trap because Dart Trap is too fun. We just did Naga Sea Witch. Let's do an easy one. Let's do Entomb. Entomb is a priest card. It is 6 mana. It says choose an enemy minion, shuffle it into your deck. It's like the reverse of Recycle. Recycle is 6 mana Druid. You take an enemy minion, you shuffle back in their deck. If you are trying to get rid of your opponent's minion that desperately that you're paying 6 mana for it, you'd rather have it in your deck than in your opponent's deck. So I think we can all say that Entomb is better than Recycle. Now, Entomb, unfortunately, is happening in Priest, which already has Mind Control at 10 mana, which is really good. If there's something that you want to Entomb, you want to Mind Control that. Right. And it has Shadow Word Death, which is 3 mana and can get rid of pretty much any large threat that your opponent puts out. So a little less necessary, but nonetheless, I think it's a good card. I think I may be higher on this card than you are even.
You are. First of all, let's establish that Entomb has the sickest golden animation in the entire game. Have you seen it?
No, what does it do?
You got to see it. Anyways, we can save that for another time. But I think everyone would universally agree that it has the best golden animation. You bring up a really good point, and this is why we can't compare cards from one class to another, right? When Dark Bomb first came out, everyone was like, "Oh, it's just a worse Frostbolt. It's a lot worse than Frostbolt. Like the freeze effect in Frostbolt is actually very significant a lot of the times." But it doesn't matter because that was something that Warlocks really needed. More initiative, and that kind of 2 mana, 3 damage barrier, that kind of, that step was very necessary. So you see Dark Bomb is a great card in the arena and great card in Constructed. Kind of the same but opposite effect here. Recycle, we would say, is an above average card for Druid. And this is a better Recycle, but Priests already have extremely efficient removal. Shadow Word Pain, Shadow Word Death. They have very, very good removal, especially big removals. It's tough for them to eliminate something like a Spectral Knight, a 4/6 or a 4/7 with a lot of health as well. But Entomb just does something that they already do very well, and it is very expensive. And once again, it doesn't address the lack of early game. So we run into the same problem where in a vacuum, great card, they just gave it to the class that really didn't need it.
Sorry, I someone in chat gave me the link to the golden version of Entomb, and I didn't hear words you said. I was just staring at the amazingness that is this animation.
How cool is that, right?
If you're listening to this like as an actual podcast, you should go search this card up when you get to a computer. This is like Oasis Snapjaw levels of animation.
I can tell right now that you want to increase the rating of this card.
Look, I was always higher on this card than you are. I don't think, like, all the stuff that you were talking about, so I lied, I was listening. I can look at something and listen at the same time. I have that ability. So it is true, it's not as useful as the Druid, because Druid, it's kind of like a last-ditch, an unexpected kind of like twist that a Druid can do that a Priest really can't do.
Yeah.
But you can also make the same kinds of reads, right? Like, I've played something big. You have not Shadow Word Deathed it. I think you don't have a Shadow Word Death because that would have been a really good turn that you would use Shadow Word Death. And you know why I didn't Shadow Word Death it? Because I don't have a Shadow Word Death. I have an Entomb and it wasn't turn 6 yet. Or like I really needed to do something else, right? So
Sure.
you can still screw around with your opponent's reads if they're really doing that. It's not as, like as good as in a Druid, obviously, but I think this kind of stuff, the effect overall is not the biggest effect. And it only comes into play at like the higher levels of the game to begin with. So you'll have more than half of your opponents where it does not matter at all.
Yeah.
Because Druid has ways to like break through a big thing too, right? Like you just use your removals, your normal size removals, and then you trade an extra minion in. So it is something to consider, but this is still a very powerful card.
It is.
It's a flat hard removal. And the reason why, like, people are wondering why, like, Assassinate is 5 mana, Recycle is 6 mana, and Tomb is 6 mana. It's because there's no Death Rattle. It removes the Death Rattle effect, essentially. In addition.
Assassinate doesn't.
Right, that's what I mean. That's why it costs 1 more mana.
Okay. Sorry.
Because it's, like, a good thing.
Yes. We have to... This is me going away and us missing this connection. And so, yeah. Okay, gotcha. We're good
now. Did that Olive Garden meal mean nothing to you?
You were much more excited about the meal than I was.
Aww.
Guys, you have not seen a man who loves Olive Garden calamari as much as ADWCTA, okay?
Olive Garden calamari is actually really good. Not the calamari itself, but the sauce. Oh, man.
Okay, let's go on.
Let's move on. This is the reverse of that. We're going to go to a card that Merps has talked about every single Lightforge for the last like 3. Like he'll work this card into every discussion since this card was revealed.
And Keeper of Alderman.
And Keeper of Alderman. I can't wait until like, we're just doing a random rogue run and then we don't have a Pit Snake, which is what this card is, and then Merps will still be talking about it all the time.
If we had a Pit Snake here,
this will be what we play. But okay, it's a Pit Snake. It's a common card, just like Entomb. And so these are like important cards, right? Like if it's a common class card, and with the LOE bonus that's coming at the end of Wing 4, you're going to see these cards. And so a Pit Snake is a 2/1 1-mana beast, and it has the text that says destroy any minion damaged by this minion, which is the same kind of text that Emperor Cobra has, that my Exna has.
Mm-hmm. So it's the poisoned sort of, or it's the poison kind of trait. Mm-hmm. So I've talked about this on Value Town, and I really like this card because I'm a big fan of cards that help a certain class do what they do very well, and especially if it has added versatility as well. So rogues, we have seen, do very well with 1-drops for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're good at being aggressive. Number two, they are good at basically eking out damage in different ways, right? So you have damage that comes out of your hand from battle cries, such as Undercity Valiant, SI7 Agent. You have damage coming out of your weapon. You have damage coming out of your minions. So you have all these ways of pushing either face damage or damage on the board. And so Pit Snake, number one, it's a 1-drop. It's very flexible. It can activate battle cries. And because the rogue is very quick on the board, and the rogue is probably the best class at gaining this board initiative and swinging the board as well, Pit Snake really forces their hand. Best case scenario, they're not a pink class, and suddenly they have to find a way to get rid of this, or you're going to get value out of it, unless they drop something like a 1-drop that you can't remove and you have to use Pit Snake on it. You're going to get value out of it. And even if it's a pink class, with the rogue, a lot of times you are very happy forcing the ping. It's turn 5, you have, a couple of minions on the board, and you say, okay, if they ping the Pit Snake, which they have to, suddenly all they can do is drop a 3. Yep. That's what my, your Dark Iron Dwarf or your 4/4 Ogre Magi or something, it can dominate their 3-drop, and then I can just drop, my 5 or 6 mana worth of cards after that, and suddenly I'm way ahead, and my chance to win is very good. So even forcing the ping, I think, is extremely powerful.
Right, because he can't, the move there on turn 5 means he actually can't play his turn 5 card unless it's like a Stranglethorn Tiger, because it will trade evenly with the Pit Snake. So he has to, absolutely has to hero power. And then even if he does happen to have a 3-mana card, which he's not guaranteed to have, right? Like, who keeps that many 3-mana cards around? It just forces things to be really awkward. So it is definitely a more pro card. And of course, I like it because it triggers combos. I'll take anything for the rogue that triggers combos, because combos are like, they get you so much value as the rogue. And it does. It puts a threat on the board your opponent has to remove. And as the rogue, you have so many ways to protect it. So that if your opponent doesn't have that hero power, they're screwed. Like, whatever they put out next is going to die to that, or they are going to have to burn a small removal on it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people really undervalue the importance of forcing a ping. A lot of times, you know, you can talk about forcing a ping. I don't think any card forces a ping as strong as this card. You know, this is something in which they if they are able to ping, they have to, and that is, you know, we talked about predictability being so powerful, or, you know, if you're able to predict what your opponent will do, that is very powerful. And this really forces their hand. And as the rogue, if you control the board and you control their actions, you've won the game.
That does sound really powerful.
It does. You're welcome.
Okay. Moving on, we're going to talk about let's talk about a rare card. It is the Jungle Moonkin. It's a Druid rare card. It's a 4-mana 4/4. It's a beast, because Blizzard is really going like all in on this whole Druid is also a beast class, just like the Hunter thing, which is cool. You know, I'm a big fan of beasts.
Yeah.
But like, okay, like a Jungle Moonkin, I don't really know what it is. I don't know Warcraft lore very well. I just know the picture makes it look really stupid and also not like a beast.
Yeah, I think people are complaining about it, but anyways.
Okay, because it's got like claws and fur and horns. And
we're getting away from the in-depth arena
and like donkey ears and like yellow glowing eyes. And anyway, that's what apparently a Jungle Moonkin is, and its ability is one of the more interesting abilities that we've seen Blizzard do, and I kind of wonder how it'll work out. Like, in the arena, it's just gonna be annoying in the arena, but the ability is both players have spell damage +2. So you get spell damage +2. Presumably you'll use it on the same turn, and Druid has this amazing common card. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called a swipe.
Pretty good.
And so when you spell damage +2, that becomes deal 6 damage to a target and 3 damage to everything else.
Yep.
So that's not just pretty good. That's like the most, like, better than a single-sided elemental destruction most of the time.
Yes.
Like,
it is ridiculous.
Yeah, and there's no overload.
Nope.
So it's incredibly good. The downside is your opponent then gets the same kind of thing, so your opponent can just like holy smite this thing down. But who cares, right? Like, you've already gotten value out of it. The real downside is if you really want to play this card on turn 4 or something, you know, you don't have a spell that you really want to use to get the +2 spell damage or anything. Well, now you're just giving your opponent a bonus. Yep. And it's a 4/4. It's not that sturdy. So if your opponent's really scared of it, they'll just remove it. Otherwise, they'll take advantage of what you're giving them. So it's even less of a drop than a 4-mana 4/4. And a 4-mana 4/4 is not a good 4-drop to begin with. But on the other hand, that combo with a swipe, oh my god.
Yeah, it's going to be sick. But you hit a key point there. It's whichever player gets to use the spell power first, right? Mm-hmm. So if you plan to use it as a Druid, you're going to use it, I'm thinking the earliest, absolute earliest, like turn 5 with Living Roots, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean,
then, you just don't think Moonfire is a card, do you?
Well...
okay. 4 mana for a 4/4 that deals 3 damage, that's a pretty insanely good deal.
With a card.
Sure.
You tend to forget that Moonfire also spends a card. But yes, that is pretty decent. And then we all have the Swipe Dream, right? Or turn 10, you have the Cabal Geomancer Jungle Moonkin Swipe combo for the Super Flame Strike.
Oh, God. This is why they made this card.
Welcome to the new meta, guys.
Oh, man. So, yeah, definitely. Like, it may not look like the most interesting card, but it really is the most interesting card when you actually see it in action, because it'll just allow for craziness, like, on both sides. So It's going to be interesting. This is obviously not the kind of swing that I like in the arena, but you can hardly call it unfair. Like, it's a
Yeah,
fair card.
it's a very
It's
fair
just
card.
it's just a super swingy card. Like, we talk about ways to cheat tempo. This hugely cheats tempo for both sides.
Yeah,
And so it kind of like throws everything up in the air.
yeah,
Like, if you're a really good player, what you really want is just like a whole bunch of neutral cards on both sides, and then you guys can duke it out and you'll win by your superior skill. But that's not a terribly fun game, and Jungle Moonkin is not a unfair card. It's not actual RNG. It's not a card that's, worse the better of a player you are. It is a fair card that is going to wreck people because of its increase in just variance by what cards
right.
you and your opponent happen to have.
But so we've been talking about it a lot. So I think it gets kind of lost because we've talked about it's like how good it could be with swipe or how bad it could be. But I think for me, it's just kind of down like middle of the road sort of. It depends on your deck. Not a great card by any means. I think it's fairly average with
I mean, I think it's better. I think it's better than a neutral 4 mana 4/4, even like a 4 mana 4/4 beast. I
right.
still think
Yeah.
this is just because you get to use it first if you really want to.
Yes.
And on top of that, you do have swipe as a possible card. And you are a druid. You have a lot of things that deal damage. Whereas if you're facing like a priest or a warrior, or even like a paladin, right? Like, they don't really have that many things that deal like direct damage. Sure, consecration would suck, especially because Jungle Moonkin happens to have 4 health. But generally, druid has more direct damage spells.
Yep.
Okay. Last card. Best card. Dart Trap. New meta. Hunters are going to put a trap now, and we're all going to be like, no, it used to be so easy. It's like when Avenge came out. Before, Paladin traps were so easy, and then Avenge came out, and we're all like, Paladin traps. That's what Dart Trap is going to do to Hunter traps. Because Bear Trap didn't do that. No one cares about Bear Trap. You like have to make one extra calculation in your head, and you're pretty much good. It like freezes you up for a little bit more. But Dart Trap, man. So what it does is it's 2 mana like all Hunter secrets, and it says when an opponent hero power is used, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. 5 damage is a lot. It's also a very good number because a lot of things have exactly 5 health, and a lot of good cards have exactly 5 health. Your Senjins, your Yetis. Now the bad part is your opponent can really just like not use the hero power. Very rarely will your opponent think like, I really need to use my hero power. And that's especially true if your opponent is not playing one of the top classes, like a ping class. They can just like, a warrior can just not use the hero power. A warlock never has to use the hero power. A priest is usually like, it's good to use the hero power, but you're not obligated to use the hero power. You just drop other big stuff. Hunters, right? Like 2 damage to your, like a fellow hunter, 2 damage to your face. Might as well put another minion out. They'd want to do that anyway for most of the point. So It's very easy to play around, and in addition to that, it's very easy still to test your hunter secrets, right? Like you kind of attack them to the face, and right? Snake trap aside, you drop a minion for the snipe.
Yeah.
Where it does really freeze you up, and this is what I'm trying to wrap my head around, because you never know how you think about things until the situation comes up, is one of the quote-unquote advanced strategies that you used to never see happen. I remember when I first started doing this last summer, like not 2015, but 2014, no one did it. Like, I had to convince Merps this was an actual good strategy, and it took a while. And it's when the hunter places an explosive trap, and you just do nothing. Like, you just flood the board more into his explosive trap, and you just don't attack the explosive trap. Because it's an explosive trap, or that it's really likely to be an explosive trap, and you can control the board and hold the board. Because if he plays minions onto that board, you get your trades in, and he's just spent 2 mana on a trap that anti-templed him. And if he doesn't play minions, his 2 damage hero power every turn isn't really going to do all that much if he has no board to hit you with. He doesn't have that much reach. So you get this huge board with like stuff that's going to survive the explosive trap, and then at some point you trigger the explosive trap, you lose 1 or 2 minions, but you have the largest tempo on the board, and the hunter's just never going to come back. So that was a move pretty much no one did 2014 summer. Now, I see it happen like about like a third of the time. It's definitely the right move most of the time. And now, Merps, you're with me now, right? Like, you do this as often as I do, if not more now.
Okay, I
Like,
definitely do it. And let's back up for a second. I don't want people to think that I was just like this total noob. I think our biggest
but no one did that back then. I
I
think I
think
was an innovator when it came to that strategy back in the day.
okay, I will give you some credit. I think the biggest difference between us back then also was when we activated it. You know, like I got a little bit of advantage. And I was like, all right, let's go now. And you were, I would say, quote, greedier with it. And I think that's correct most of the time. But
No, I'm
yeah,
super greedy with it. I'll just like stand there and do nothing for like 5 turns. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
my opponent would never know what was happening. They would like think through the whole turn because they're like, "Oh God, what do I do now? No one's ever done this to me."
yeah.
Um,
But
but yeah, and
no,
that was back when like Trump and Anti Gravity both rated Explosive Trap pretty darn high, and it was because you would get value from it, right? Your opponent would have two things at 2 health. You play an Explosive Trap, they'd hit in and then play more cards.
right. That's when people were like, "Oh man, it's basically a 2 mana consecration, and consecration is awesome."
Yeah.
So yeah, and then this idea floated around for a while. But yeah, with Dart Trap, I think part of the problem is that yeah, it depends on your opponent as well, right? And a lot of things depend on your opponent. That's basically what it makes sense. It's a trap. You wait for your opponent to do something, and then haha, I gotcha.
Yeah.
But let's look at what traps are good versus what traps are bad. The good traps are the ones that
Well,
force.
yeah. Before we get there, I want to finish my thought on the freezing the hunter's board strategy, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Like if you're freezing the hunter's board by not triggering the trap, that means you don't attack face because you think there's an explosive trap. Now there's another layer where there's a bear trap where you may not attack face because you get a bear back and you can't deal with the bear, or the bear will like eat one of your minions afterwards on his next turn. So you have even more reasons to freeze the board, so to speak. But now that there's a dart trap, do you freeze the board? Because if it's actually a dart trap, you could freeze the board just to be overly cautious. But now you also can't hero power. Not that you'd want to hero power in any case, but if you want to like see if it's a dart trap and you do use your hero power, you're going to lose you're going to have a chance to lose something on the board because 5 damage to almost anything you play in the earlier mid game is going to kill it, and it's going to
Yeah,
have a good chance of hitting it. So you're going to be more incentivized to freeze the board just as if this was an explosive trap or a bear trap, even though it's not.
yeah. I don't think Dart Trap is a god awful card. Just because. So number one, freezing their hero power, it's pretty useful for quite a few classes. Number two, it makes the kind of puzzle a little bit harder. Because especially if you are the trap that is kind of further down on the totem pole. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them will check for freezing trap, they'll check for explosive trap first, and then because this is lower on, you may have made forced them to make kind of a couple of inefficient moves to check for those traps first, and then even if they realize, okay, it could be this, or it could be snakes, or it could be snipe, or something like that, you've already forced them to go down this very kind of you got to check off the boxes to check the traps, and then afterwards you either freeze their hero power, or if you don't freeze their hero power, it deals 5 damage. Like you said, it's going to kill off almost anything on their board, and even if it goes face, I would say 50% of the time you want it to go face. 2 damage,
Right.
sorry, two
Mm-hmm.
mana, 5 damage. That's a better kill command. That's awesome.
Yep. And
So
as someone in chat very, very correctly points out, spell damage does affect this damage.
yes,
So
Jungle Moonkin. There we go.
weird stuff can happen. Okay, so that's Dart Trap. Basically, if you see it, or like if you see a hunter now have a trap, also think twice about using your hero power, at least until you test for like freezing or what you think it is. Or because testing a trap usually means like trying to trigger it in a favorable situation. I can't think of a situation where it's favorable to trigger a dart trap. That's the power of the dart trap.
Yes.
So the favorable situation of triggering a dart trap is I have a whole bunch of 1/1s on the board. Trigger the dart trap.
Another reason why Muster for Battle is OP.
Yeah, exactly.
Dart Trap.
But yeah, so it's like a lose-lose situation, unlike a lot of other traps.
Yes.
So the only win is if you don't trigger it, and if you don't trigger it, you can't use your hero power. So I like it. It like when you hear that, you're thinking of, oh, well then, if my hero power is bad, I'm good. If the hero power is good, I'm bad. So that's a very good effect that this Dart Trap has. It has that kind of like Coliseum Manager type effect, except
Yep.
you don't put it in your deck. Your opponent forces you into it.
Yep.
Okay, that's all the cards in Wing 3 of the League of Explorers.
Woohoo.
Um, Very nice, very nicely done. We went on for a long time. It's some
It
very
is.
interesting cards, right?
Yeah, so bottom line, it's not going to be a very powerful wing, but it'll be pretty good. Especially, there's going to be cards that you're definitely going to see in the arena. Huge Toad, you're going to see that quite often now, just because decent body, pretty good death rattle. It's going to be a card that you're going to see quite often. It's going to be a staple now.
Yep. Okay. Let's before we move on, and we actually have like a bit more show to do. We're going to talk a lot about the Druid because we're about to play a Druid in the Arena Coupe, and we just want to talk a little about it. So today's episode is going to run a little bit on the long side, but we're excited. It was Thanksgiving. We've been playing a lot. I want to thank all the people who have fed the goat and donated through Patreon or direct donations or subscribed via Twitch. The patron donation link is patreon.com with an EON /grinning goat. And those contributions have allowed us to order today new computers, desktops that'll actually be able to handle the streaming thing. If you guys watch our stream, Merps has been running a potato for a while. We both run single screens. We're probably the only humans alive now that run single screens, much less like actual streamers that have to manage a lot of different windows. So we can move, and we do that because it takes more processing power than our computers were able to handle to run two screens at once when we're streaming. So no more. As soon as these computers come to us, we'll be very glad that happened, and it'll let me play Fallout 4 on the highest settings. So that's all thanks to you guys. So just wanted to give everyone who contributed a shout out. And if you're thinking about contributing, we would definitely love the support. If you like the content, it's how we keep like the Lightforge running, our stream, our YouTube channel, our tier list, all that stuff. So very much appreciated. And now we'll have the question from the GOAT.
All right. So today's question from the GOAT, we're gonna kind of go outside of the Hearthstone universe a little bit. So both of us, ADWCTA and myself, have played Magic the Gathering a little bit. I don't think we were, ever that great. But the question is, if you were to take any mechanism or function or feature from Magic the Gathering and put it into Hearthstone, what would it be?
Okay. So I got this question before the stream, so I had a little bit of time to like actually think about it. Magic the Gathering, one of my favorite times of Magic the Gathering was the Meridian era, I think they call it. That may not be what they call it. God, it's been so long. It's the place with like a whole bunch of
Show
shadow
off your
minions.
expertise. Yes.
I had no
Show off
expertise in Magic. If you guys are wondering, I played limited Magic the Gathering, and I was not even like an infinite like sealed player. I mostly played sealed, and I was not able to actually go infinite in Magic. So it's definitely got a lot better when I moved to Hearthstone. But I love the shadow mechanic, and I know like people hated the shadow mechanic. And if you don't know Magic the Gathering, or you don't know Magic the Gathering that far back, which isn't even that far back, Shadow was basically they separated out their minions. And if you had a shadow effect,
Yeah.
you can't interact with normal minions. Like they can't block you, and you can't block them, and it's just this whole like other thing that was fairly pointless to just add to a game, and it really didn't add anything very fun or very good. It just made it like a pain for your opponent to try to like have enough like shadow minions or walls that have shadow or just things to like block you and still interact with the board. So it's generally considered like a really bad move on Magic the Gathering's part to introduce that mechanic. And I think like after like one or two sets, people were like, God, please get rid of this mechanic. And it was rotated out very quickly and never visited again. But I really like it for Hearthstone, and I'll explain why. It's because Magic has the opposite relationship, right? In Magic the Gathering, you choose which guys attack, and then your opponent picks which of his minions blocks your attackers. So the person with the initiative is both of you. You have to decide to attack for your opponent to block, and your opponent can then decide to block however he wants with whichever minions he wants. He can do 2 people to block 1 minion, and it's like all this other like weird rule stuff. But basically, it's not that the attacker has the initiative. So what Shadow allows you to do is just to kind of go straight for your opponent's face if your opponent couldn't like block. And so that's one of the problems with the mechanic. But if you move this mechanic into Hearthstone, it would have the opposite effect. Because in Hearthstone, you can go to your opponent's face anyway. All Shadow would do is allow you to get through taunts, right? But that aside, it'll allow it doesn't really add the dimension that kind of allows you to have an unblockable minion for most situations. Instead, what it allows is for you to have a minion on the board where you're limited, where you can't interact with your opponent's board. You can never hit your opponent's minion. You can never get a good trade. It's actually a very limiting factor for you. So it kind of flips the shadow mechanic from MTG on its head. It still has that, it gets through taunts element to it, but it will also have the I can't interact with my opponent's board when I want to, which you were never able to do in Magic the Gathering anyway, because it's your opponent that decided the blockers. So
Okay, all right.
it creates this interesting smork dynamic that really has a large drawback. Like you have to be very dedicated to smorking to use this as smorking. If you're not up with the rather old lingo, is just going to the face. If you don't have an agenda that's just to go face, and your opponent doesn't drop minions with Shadow, you have some problems, right? You're basically putting down like a persistent on the board head crack, right? If you have like whatever, and it also makes things like ogres really useful potentially, right? If my opponent wants to remove this minion and he has an ogre, well, now I can hit it because it's essentially a stealth minion. It creates like these random effects, right? Like cleaves and like whatever. It makes those more useful because now you have another way to remove this. It makes things like Ogre Warmaul actually useful. It gives crowd removal or whatever the same thing. It allows you to position the board against stuff like Betrayal or like Power Shot a little bit better because those shadow minions probably also can't be targeted, I assume. You can also make them able to be targeted. I don't know. You can make the mechanic however you want to make it.
Yeah. All right. So I was initially very skeptical, still a little bit skeptical. I think the implications of that could be dangerous in terms of design, but I see what you mean. And I see that it has a certain drawback, like you said. So I think that's pretty cool. I think the two things I'm most interested in implementing, number one would be enchantments. I think enchantments basically I want to affect the board in a different way, right? Right now we have spells, we have minions, you play your minions and you use your spells for initiative or card draw. I think having enchantments that kind of interact with the board in a new way would be very fun. You'd have to be very careful with that because...
How do you put that on the board?
How do you
Because I had an idea before where instead of an enchantment, you would have like, this is only for classes that don't have weapons, and it would just be what you hold in your hand instead of a weapon, and it just wouldn't go away. You wouldn't be able to attack with it. But and then would it interact with weapon mechanics? Like, would it get swamp oozed? Because you are holding an enchantment. Acid does melt enchantments, I assume.
I don't know the mechanisms of the magical ooze. But I mean, look, as for implementation, I'm not 100% sure. You can make kind of, mages wield a wand or something, or you can just have an enchantment out there, have an enchantment slot. I think that would just be cool, something that affects the board, but in a different way. Or I think something else that you could do. Actually, I had an idea and I just totally forgot. I got so hung up on enchantment.
I think we talked about it before this. It was trample.
No, I didn't. I was
you don't
joking.
like trample?
No, trample is a little bit.
Way to mislead me.
That's
make me look bad.
No, that's definitely misleading. Oh, sorry, instance. How could I forget?
Ooh, that's complicated. Really, instance?
It's very complicated. I think you'd have to have a watered down version of that. So instead of, because I think one of the problems with instance is
by the way, instance in Magic the Gathering is something you can play on your opponent's turn.
Yes.
And really at any point in the stack. It's really complicated in Magic, but just for the sake of simplicity, just think like it's a reactionary card that your opponent you can play on your opponent's turn, and if your opponent tries to do something, you can do something that kind of like gets before it.
Yeah, so I think instance would, and you could see kind of the theme I'm going for, right? Like more ways to interact with the board, more ways to interact with your opponents. I think that's pretty cool. One of the problems right now is that secrets are the closest thing you have to instance that
Right.
interrupts your opponent's turn. I think if you actually had an instant, it would kind of increase the skill level. It would also kind of give you another way to react. And because you have no blockers, it's not like Magic the Gathering where you block. It gives you another way to kind of impact what happens. Now, once again, we run into the issue that it does slow the game down. It is going to be difficult to implement. But once again, this is a question from the go. We're not in Blizzard headquarters sitting down to how do we implement this?
We have the pleasure of suggesting things that, like Shadow may break constructed. We don't care. We're just Arena. Instance may break the game and cost a couple $1 billion to implement. We don't care. We're just throwing it out there.
Exactly.
I mean, okay, I have to come out really hard against the instance because I just like the fact that I don't have to do anything on my opponent's turn. Like, I like that a lot as an element of Hearthstone. And I think that is part of the soul of Hearthstone, is that you can just kind of like do nothing on your opponent's turn, right? You can talk to chat, you can like just minimize your window and do something else. You can read a book if you are, better than we are as human beings. You can just do anything you want with it. And I like that. I like that as part of the pacing of the game. I don't want it to actually turn into Magic, where you actually get to do a lot of things on your opponent's turn, and where like half the decks do more things on your opponent's turn than on your own turn.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I also like things simple. Like, you'll see me like really fight against almost any kind of complexity in these games. But okay, I think that was a really good discussion. Actually, it's a really good question from the goat.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
And now we move on to Card Good Bad, where we tell you whether card is good or bad. And because we're doing a Druid theme, because we're doing a Druid run after this, we are going to talk about Innervate and Wild Growth.
By we, you mean me?
Oh yeah, I mean you. You can start off with the Innervate and Wild Growth talk.
All right, so you guys should know these cards, whether it's Arena or Constructed. I mean, these cards have defined the Druid in Constructed since the game has began. Ramp Druid, and basically with Druid, it's Innervate, Wild Growth, and then Force of Nature, Savage Roar, right? It's like every Druid.
And now it's Darnassus, right? If you're going to go with a more ramping thing. Also Grove Tender ramps.
Yeah. But let's talk about these cards in Arena. So you could see why these cards are very good in Constructed, because you build your deck. So you could build your deck in anticipation of curve. You could perfectly build out and say, all right, these are the minions I want for this mana slot. And then we're going to reach there faster than our opponent. And we're just going to kind of outpower them with these ridiculously good cards. It's a lot harder to do that in the Arena, which is why Innervate and Wild Growth are just kind of good / decent cards. I think a lot of people will see Innervate as probably the better card. Not by a mile, but it is the better card. It's a more flexible card.
You cheat tempo with it.
Yes, you can gain tempo with it, and a lot of times, because you can choose which turn you tempo, so you can exhaust kind of a removal, or see kind of, you can get a few reads, and then you could just Innervate out, or you could just turn 2 Innervate out, pile it a Shredder, and be like, deal with it, right?
Turn 1 Yeti with coin.
Yeah, there you go.
That's how you lose in the Arena, like when your opponent turn 1 Yetis with coin and follows it up with a curve.
Yeah. So Innervate, I think, not that much to talk about. We know exactly how good it is. Wild Growth, I find a bit more controversial in that I think some people really like it. Some people don't like it. I have to say I was in the camp that didn't like it before, but the more I play in the Arena, the more I find that it's a pretty good card. I would never rate it as that great of a card, but in quite a few decks, just the fact that you have the extra mana, it's very useful. And you're not going to get true value out of it every single turn, but Druids tend to, if you want to, you can skew a little bit higher in the mana curve, and you still see that effect, because even though you don't get the true power out of the Wild Growth every single turn, it's just statistically unlikely. Your opponent, you're facing another Arena deck. You're probably not going to be facing the best deck in the world on the other side as well. But when you do gain that mana advantage, it is very useful. And once again, you could use on turn 10 to draw a card. But I've been liking Wild Growth more and more as I play in the arena.
Okay, so let me break this down like math-wise for what Wild Growth does.
Yes.
You play it as player 2, you turn into player 1. If you haven't thought about it that way, like think about it, it's actually exactly like that, and you missed your first turn. But you don't do stuff on turn 1 with the first player anyway most of the time, so it's not that big of a waste. But mathematically, if you are always one turn ahead of your opponent, you drop the bigger minion, your opponent drops a smaller minion, your bigger minion will be able to kill your opponent's smaller minion and leave something with 1 health behind, maybe 2 health behind, and your opponent has to deal with that. Or your opponent, who has the initiative, because your opponent has put out the minion first, will be putting like a buff, right? Like a Dark Iron Door for a hero power, just something onto his minion to trade up into your bigger minion, or will remove your minion efficiently with a spell or something, like a fireball, and then maybe even drop another small minion after that to switch up with the tempo. But it basically sets your opponent to always have to do something special every turn. And every turn your opponent is unable to do something special, you gain a ridiculous amount of tempo. Not just 1 mana's worth of tempo, but because your minion eats your opponent's minion at whatever size it comes out on, you gain a 5-1 on the board if this is mid-game. You gain a 6-1 on the board, a 4-1 on the board, and that's more than 1 mana's worth of tempo. So you're forcing your opponent to always have something as long as you are both playing on curve. That is very powerful because in the arena, your opponent rarely has anything, probably just has one thing. And so all the other turns, you are just getting that slow advantage and that slow buildup. And so that's where Wild Growth on turn 2 shines. If you Wild Growth on turn 2, your opponent gets 2 or 3 more damage on the board, and then your opponent has to make up for the rest of your 8 turns that follow that with just very efficient ways to remove. And that's why it's balanced, right? You can think about it. You're like, well, he probably has like 2 removals, and then, you add 2 or 3 damage. That's like 5 out of the 8 turns. He's pretty much there. He gets the initiative to start with. And so that's how that card is balanced if you play it on turn 2. And if you play it in the late game, it's balanced because you're going to get a card back that is going to be around the average card in your deck, which is like a 64 rating, which is way higher than Wild Growth would be. So you're cycling the card. And that's worth a significant amount that you are just able to cycle the card no matter what. So it's very balanced in the arena. In Constructed, it's kind of like, oh yeah, Ramp Druid, of course. In the arena, not so much. But once you break down the mechanics, and the arena is all about these fundamental mechanics and how to math things out like that. So you can see exactly what your opponent needs to put you in a bad spot. And what you need to do, of course, is to actually use your mana and curve out with 1 less card, which actually makes it somewhat harder. But you can also see why, like, if you're a really good player, you don't necessarily like Wild Growth, because it's about what your opponent does and what your opponent has, right? It's like making your opponent... I always have this 2 dynamics where my opponent is a rogue or my opponent is a priest. And rogue, if my opponent is a rogue, that means nothing I do matters. It's all about what my opponent does. And if my opponent is a priest, it's like nothing my opponent does matters. It's all about what I do and whether I'm able to handle it. So you're pushing your opponent more towards the rogue side than the priest side by using a Wild Growth. And that's less good if you are a better player, because you want to be the one making the decisions because you are good at them and you will make the right ones. And, generally, the more decisions you have to make, the more power you can get from them if you are making the right ones. So you don't want to give that to your opponent and be like, okay, let's see if you're a good player, or, if you luck out with the curve and all that.
Yeah. All right. So bottom line, Innervate, good. Wild Growth, above average.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's wrap this up really quickly before we actually get to the Druid run with a quick word about the Druid. You have actually been playing Druid in LOE. I have not been playing Druid in LOE. Something that happened, if you guys are thinking about the history of the Druid, in TGT, Druid got a ton faster. It got faster in GVG, it got faster in BRM, and it got a ton faster in TGT with Living Roots, which is 1 mana, like a really good 1 mana 1-drop that doubles as a removal later on, and it helps you spread the board, it helps you get more tokeny. You also get Darnassus Aspirant, which not only helps you ramp, but is also just a normally good 2-drop to begin with, right? Like a Croc. So the Druid definitely got a lot faster compared to its old like Iron Bark Protector roots. And on top of that, it also got more beast synergies. That's kind of like the other aspect of it. And Blizzard's still going down the beast route.
Yeah, I found. So I thought Druid was very powerful in the previous meta in TGT, and part of the reason I think that it was so powerful was because of its matchup with Rogue, which I thought was very powerful, especially the way that I played Rogue. Whenever I played Rogue and I faced it up against a Paladin, I felt really good because I could deny Paladin the board from turn two essentially, and just ride that to victory. With Druid, because they have like good removals for kind of an aggressive rogue in swipe and starfall, and they also had big taunts that you had to either assassinate or sap, but they just had a lot of taunts as well. I found that kind of the power of the Druid also came from the matchup with the rogue, and right now I think the Druid is in a very good place still, just because I think the game is slowed down a little bit. I don't think any class is particularly that fast right now. And who's very good at playing a slow game? It's Priest and it's Druid. The problem with Priest is that it still lacks early game. Druid doesn't have that problem. Even though
is Druid still good at playing a late game? I feel like there's so much card dilution that happens since like the classic Druid, right? Like how many Ironbarks do you get?
You're still going to get, because between Ironbark, between Ancient of War, between Volcanic Lumber, between Mech Bearcat,
like epic cards, man.
Sure, but those add up, and you're going to have your big cards. And Druid of the Claw is always good, and also it's not just about late game; it's about flexibility, right? So Druid is like good big minions and also flexibility. I think flexibility is always going to be good. Sometimes it's a little bit better than usual, but I think especially during a changing meta like we're in right now, flexibility is so good. And
maybe that's why the Warrior was so good for me these days, because Warrior has like ultimate flexibility with what you do with the weapons. So yeah, no, I can see the flexibility part being used more, and I find myself using like Druid of the Claw to charge out. As I play, I just use it more and more. And I remember no one ever used to charge out. That used to be like the stupidest thing you can possibly do with it back in Classic.
Back in Classic, no one charged the Druid of the Claw unless it was for lethal. Right. It was, you have a 4/6 taunt. Yeah, of course, I'm taunting every time.
So value oriented, but now things get less predictable, right? So you're much less guaranteed to get value from the 4/6. Okay. So Druid is getting a little back into its slower roots with the TGT bonus leaving. I can see that. And I guess we'll see what happens with the Druid. It's always been one of like my best classes. Never my best class, but always like 3 or 4. And not because I think I'm particularly great with Druid, just because it's so steady, right? It's like you said, right? It's flexible. Warrior had, until Blizzard destroyed Warrior, had always been one of my top classes as well because of the flexibility. And I think if you have a really good feel of the game and you really know exactly what you need and what your win conditions are, and when these things are doing, like actually having the flexibility with one card to do 2 or 3 different types of things, you can get a lot of burn from that flexibility in a way that you would not be from something like the Shaman's Overload, right? Which, yes, it helps you flip the board. Yes, you have to figure out when to do it, but a Lightning Bolt is dealing 3 damage. That's all it's doing. It's not like an Arcanite Reaper that's either a 2-turn Pyroblast or it removes 2 of your opponent's minions, right? Like you're actually making trade-offs there. It's not a Druid of the Claw where you can get a taunt with 2 more health, or you can remove a minion off the board right there. And still keep a 2/4 body, a 4/2 body, or maybe just like deal 4 extra damage to your opponent's face. Like those are trade-offs, and they're especially like they're what's fun, right? Like I have a lot of fun with these classes because of that.
Yep. Okay, I think that's a good wrap up of the Druid.
And we've gone long enough with our talking.
Oh, yeah.
I think people want to see some action, so we're ending the Lightforge right here, and we are going to be doing our Druid run. Thank you if you're listening to this on the podcast. Thank you guys for listening, and next week we will have a Wing 4 discussion, Wing 4 preview with the rest of the LOE cards in this ever-shifting arena meta with the League of Explorers. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Take care, guys.